Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and for the next hour or so, we're going to have a really interesting program. If you caught my coverage of WorldCoin and Sam Altman and the Orb, I could not help but equate the Orb to the Loc-Nar, the Orb of Evil, and there it is right there. I'm going to put myself behind it. You're watching heavy metal, and although in reality it resembles more like the Phantasm murder orb, the Loc-Nar is the Orb of Evil. It is the eternal darkness that surrounds us, and it just made me think of this film so many ways over because it starts off really interestingly where basically you're on this journey to Earth with a spaceman. You know, this is 1982, and you get down and immediately murder. Immediately murder. This is a cartoon. You're kind of like, whoa, what is going on here? This is before the time of anime. And then it reveals to you that it is literally the eternal evil that influences the universe and the darkness you can't get rid of. So to me, a device that literally takes your biometric information in order to give you a universal basic income and one day hopefully ensure the democratic process is that Orb of Evil. I thought to myself, who can I break this down with? Jay Dyer. Jay Dyer loves his movies, loves his pop culture, loves his religious overtones, and he is the first person I thought of when I thought about this comparison. Jay, thank you so much for joining us. My first experience with heavy metal was probably way too young. I was about 9 or 10 years old. Downstairs from us, my aunt and her husband lived, and he had some bootleg VHS copy. I was probably 9 or 10 years old. Now, obviously, I am not going out and telling my audience to go show this film to a 9 or 10-year-old. It is extremely sexually explicit, a lot of drug over and undertones as well. But at the end of the day, it is this kind of multiple allegory story for good and evil. And, you know, it stuck with me my entire life. It got parodied later by South Park. It is part of, I think, the underground cultural zeitgeist, if you will. When did you first see it? And what were your first, like, initial, responses to it?
Yeah, I saw it in high school, and I'm glad that you picked this because it's really an overlooked kind of niche genius in a way genre. People have forgotten about these 80s, 90s era, sci-fi, fantasy, you know, cartoon movies that came out. There was quite a few of these. There's Gondahar, Fire and Ice, Forbidden Planet, heavy metal, and actually, I grew up in high school with my best buddy who was a big comic book dude. He ended up becoming an actual professional comic book artist. So actually, he was a metalhead. He was a comic book dude. So I grew up watching all of these movies. We'd go over to his house. I remember being bombed out of my mind, smoking weed, watching heavy metal in high school, probably ninth grade. I don't remember anything about. I mean, I remember sequences. I remember John Candy doing the voices. I remember different, the robot scene, the robot sex scene. I remember the chick taking a nude bath, but I had no idea like the meaning, the significance, and yeah, you're absolutely right to highlight kind of the Gnostic parallels. I wrote down a lot of notes about that. A lot of weird cultural stuff going on at that time too, where this tied into this sort of metal was getting really big, right? I mean, metal comes out of late 70s Black Sabbath type of stuff. It's starting to really kick off, and there was this appeal that science fiction and fantasy had tied to metal that was often tied to, like you said, like just like big bosomy chicks. It was just such an 80s thing, and I think it's just funny on so many levels, even beyond the religious, to look at the what's considered a babe, post Kardashian, right? It moves from big boobs in the 70s and 80s to nowadays post Kardashian. It's all about that ass. So it's just weird to see the cultural changes. Another cultural shift too, and I'll let you have the floor back, was that you had this stuff coming out in the 80s, and it was really popular in these underground circles, this style of stuff. But it all kind of eventually gave way to anime. And so by the mid to late 90s, you get Ghosts in the Shell, you get underground popular anime things, and then you start seeing Mio Hayazaki's stuff getting popular. Disney buys his studio up, and then anime stuff just seems to flood the West. And I have my own theories about why that might be, but yeah. So this is basically pre-anime when you have this cartoon stuff wedded to heavy metal.
I mean, you're not wrong, especially, Akira would probably be the most culturally significant. I think that came out either late 80s or early 90s for that anime era, and really, in my opinion, took a lot away from some of the sequences in heavy metal, especially the animation styles. Obviously, it had a little bit more of that Asian overtone and look, but when you look at like the monster specifically, it's very reminiscent of some of the art style. So, you mentioned John Candy. Okay, and that's what is another really unique aspect about this film. Big metal names. You said Black Sabbath; they're on there. There's other background stories. Blue Oyster Cult was supposed to get a song. I think that they weren't able to do it because it was too much of a giveaway of the story. It was supposed to be about. It was written about the bass line that wraps the whole story up. So they went with something else. At the same time, John Candy, at the time, I'm thinking to myself, wow, he was a huge actor, Uncle Buck. And, kind of you're a kid, and he's a comedic, like, family actor. And so, like, the first story that gets told is, you got this geeky kid, and for some reason, you've already watched the Loc-Nar destroy a bunch of things in the very first 10, 15 minutes. You realize basically you interact with it, and you could just die. And somehow this geeky kid finds what he think is a meteor in the back of his yard, and he's able to interact with the Loc-Nar for some reason. And, and that's what I love about this story. It's got, like, everything. It's like this kid's fantasy because the Loc-Nar sucks him into this pagan universe where it's worshipped. The setup is he's talking about how in some worlds I'm worshipped to the girl. And the first thing he sees is essentially this pagan-like sacrifice.
Yeah.
And he realizes he's no longer this geeky kid, but he's got this crazy heroic body. And he rescues her. And from this journey of rescuing her, you meet these two kind of archetypes that are trying to harness the power. And, long story short on this one, he doesn't succumb to the lust for the Loc-Nar. He looks at what he's already been given, and he says he loves it. He's got this great-looking girl. He's jacked. He doesn't want to go back home, but he definitely doesn't want to be all-powerful. And the Loc-Nar even mentions, even when people are able to resist my power. This is really like, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some anti-hero stories in here, and they eventually, in my opinion, get darker and darker, and we'll get into that. But this one essentially is this kid overcomes it, and he's the hero, and he leaves with the girl. But the Loc-Nar says, even when they can resist my power, I don't lose any. I go on, and he just finds his next victim. What did you think about that first sequence?
Yeah, so we had this setup, like you said, when the orb appears, it kills a spaceman, and it talks to this young girl and says, you're important. We get the idea that she's singled out, she's probably chosen for something. It gets explained later, and he explains that he's the multi-dimensional god of the sum of all evils. So all the worlds and all the dimensions that are out there that exist. So we're already having like multiverse stuff, right? This concentrated evil is the god of all of those worlds, and it's the god of destruction, violence, deformity, chaos, etc. And so it's just that's weird because from the outset, the appearance of a being like this, if we have the biblical narrative, that would be Satan. But we later on find out that it's more of a Gnostic presentation because this is the being that runs the universes, and that at one point actually causes one of the characters to tell the truth. when they're coming out against Captain Stern. But there's a couple elements that I think are worth mentioning before we get into the esoteric stuff, which is I didn't realize it until this sequence, the first sequence with the New York cabbie. Did you notice how similar all of that was to Fifth Element? I think.
There's actually videos on that. It is very similar to Fifth Element.
Luc Besson must have just basically kind of borrowed, or whoever wrote that, from this an opening sequence where we find out that in future dystopian New York, there's deals between basically space crime, like organized space crime with like the Space Dawn, who represents the Venusians, and even in Fifth Element, the Bruce Willis character is a cabbie, and you have this cabbie here, and he meets this girl who's fleeing from these Venusians, and she's basically like Mila Jovovich, the Lilu character, the Multipass character. Anyway, all of that was really weird, but when you get to the next sequence, which was the John Candy character, is the nerdy kid who's given all of this power and status in this alternate universe. I kind of think they're taking a dig at their typical reader base, right? Because they're basically saying, look, nerdy dudes live in a fantasy world where they get the chicks and where they're, buff as all get out. And the other element that you said which is correct, which is that world that he goes to, the Ultek and Loc-Nar, is basically a power that you can harness through all kinds of worship, all kinds of ritual magic, including human sacrifice. Because what's going on there is not just human, it's also sex magic later on. They use a honeypot thing where they deflect to get the Loc-Nar back for that sort of Greek. He looks like a gay Greek god, the dude that's like trying to get the John Candy character to get the Loc-Nar back for him. Very much like an Apollo kind of character.
Yeah.
But I think they're hinting at all of the pagan religions, all the Greek paganism, human sacrifice. All of these are means by which, in a neo-pagan universe, you can harness this power of the gods, and turn it to your will and intention. So we kind of have at the outset, there's not objective good and evil. Good and evil are relative to whoever is kind of the magus or the god. And God is something that you can become through mastering, these practices, whether science fiction, whether science and technology, or whether occult practices. So that's what we're being set up for. And then it kind of moves through these different sequences, like you said, of worlds where the Loc-Nar is basically explaining to the girl at the beginning that it is the power and the god of all the universes, and it can't be overcome.
Yeah, again, it's doing that for a reason. But you talked about, once again, the New York City sequence, right? And I did skip over that. And first of all, I think that's obviously an amazing sequence, because it's kind of like taking from the old noir detective feel, and
Exactly.
the narrator there, but instead it's this cabbie. And like you said, there's a lot of parallels you could say with the Fifth Element, but ultimately, the Loc-Nar is going to be on display in New York City. There's even a mention of the United Nations, how it's been turned into low-income housing. There's a dig on quote-unquote illegal aliens, only instead of them talking about how many people have migrated there, they're talking about aliens. So there's definitely some cultural relevance there that that people would look at now and go maybe a little cringy, but at the same time, that is how the feeling was. You know what I mean? That was where the culture was. And then it moves into the story where this thing is supposed to be on display, and somehow the daughter of the scientist who was going to put it on display gets it. And here's another one of these tales where like the hero character is kind of an anti-hero, right? But at the end, the Loc-Nar is able to tempt the one woman with greed, right? She gives it up for greed and then turns on the guy. And the moral of the story is, don't do that either. There's all these moral tales because he ends up taking this woman out. Someone who, obviously he was not only helping, but, she kind of conned him with a sexual relationship to help her get what she wanted. So again, more moral tales of how like the Loc-Nar is corrupting all of these people. And he even says it, she wasn't so bad. She just got a little greedy is all. And at the other end, he didn't really have to kill her.
Yeah, it's a relativized ethic, which is weird.
Yeah.
And the God figure, the deity, it's more like the notion that God is a kind of a technology. And it's a technology that is attainable by gnosis or will to power. So basically anybody or anything can become the god or become the entity if it can attain this apotheosis, deified status through whatever the means are. And there's different ways of doing this in different universes, right? And so we see a relativized ethic, I think, because the deity isn't really what we would think of as a god in the Bible as a personal god, but it's more like this thing that you can master, right? And you get this idea in a lot of religions, like Masonry, for example, has this idea that as you come up the ladder of the Masonic hierarchy, you're learning the secret gnosis, the secret names of God, and all that to get to the next level. And it's so rather than it being a relationship with like a personal God, it's more like secret gnosis that allows you to attain these higher levels of status. And this universe is kind of populated in what's sometimes called exo-theology. I'm talking about the universe in the heavy metal movie. Exo-theology is the idea that there's multiple universes, multiple galaxies, and that all of the religious theology that we have in the world religions is kind of an expression perhaps of astrotheology or exotheology, that the entities of space are the real gods, right? Everybody's heard of Ancient Aliens and George Tsoukalos and his crazy hair and all that. That whole mythology, I'm not saying there might not be, I mean, there could be alien, demonic entities or something like that we call aliens. But the idea that the universe is populated with all these different multiverses and worlds and gods is an exotheology, and the world religions are usually read through the lens of exotheology. And as this story progresses, it more and more was kind of reminding me of Mormonism. So the ultimate theology of Mormonism, if you don't know, is the idea that there's kind of like space gods, and when you die, you can become a god of your own god of a planet or of a solar system, and you can father celestial babies. I mean, it doesn't explicitly say that at the end of the movie. I'm just saying that when we get to the last scene with the girl who we find out is reincarnated, we're back to that pagan notion of like, you have this divine destiny. There's a a battle between good and evil. That's a dualistic scheme, because the girl at the end has to essentially, she becomes the reincarnation of the goddess, who then can fight against the Loc-Nar, and that's the only thing that can destroy him. So ultimately, I'm just saying that exotheology and neo-Gnosticism are basically just ancient pagan presentations that are in and rife throughout this story progression. I didn't mean to get ahead of you.
No. I mean, especially when you talk about, I guess, the multiverse and the universe and all this alien idea and the way it's been pushed. A lot of people associate that with Star Wars, but something like this, which is around the same time frame, that kind of could bring us right into the next tale, and really my favorite one, right? And here's a great example of it. It's you're looking at a courtroom, and this isn't the jury, but they're there, and you've got the robots and the robot people, and you've got the aliens, and then you've got this military guy, and the military guy, he's got the good chin, and you obviously look at him, and he's this astute guy, and he's charged with all these crazy things.
It's like 30-something rapes.
Yeah, the rapes and the murders, amongst other things, are just pretty crazy. Now, this is set up, like you said, in this situation where this individual just picks up a little marble off the ground. And the marble is the Loc-Nar. And it just so happens, he pleads innocent to all these cases. It's very like slapstick cartoon with the lawyer. The lawyer can't believe it. He's like, what are you doing? And this guy thinks he's got it in the bag, right? He's the big military cheese. He's done all these things. He's important. The system is rigged. And he gets up there, and this guy starts praising him. Same guy with the little thing. And like
he's also a pedo. Remember that? Like he was.
Oh, I was going to bring it up.
Yeah.
He gets worse than a pedo, if that's possible. So as this, at first, he's rolling it like a marble, and he's covering for the guy. And basically, the captain is telling his lawyer how this guy's going to be his character witness. Is going to get him off. Again, very simplistic story. But in the middle of it, he starts telling the truth and turning it into something else. And like you said, one of the charges is that he ran a preschool brothel, basically. So, like you realize how bad this guy actually is. And again, he looks like something out of Superman and Clark Kent. And then, as it goes forward, what I really find interesting, like here you'll see him like morph into the guy, and it comes to this cartoon level. But notice, like as the cartoon level comes, let's see if we can play this part right here. And this guy gets ready to run. All of a sudden, it gets even more like cartoony, like he's the hero, as this thing shows up out of nowhere. the little eye companion thing, that a chase ensues. And, you know, here's where the story for me, like, shows you kind of the Loc-Nar hinting at, like, he loves people like this. Because at the end of this, the guy's named is Hanover Fist, and he was going to pay him $35,000. And he chases him down, and you think you got him cornered, and it's over for the captain. Hell, you've watched a lot of graphic murders in this. Figure he's going to get torn to bits. I mean, this terrible person, maybe the most terrible person that you've seen throughout the entire movie at this point, with what he's charged with. And again, he's got this clean-cut look. He pays him off. He goes from the big giant to angry. And then, instead of, like, keeping his word, he's not under any threat at this point, he murders him. And he gets away scot-free, it looks like. It looks like he's going to get away with all of his crimes and continue. And that, to me, it kind of, like, showed that, like, the power of the Loc-Nar was, like, the Loc-Nar may have been there to, like, protect this guy. You know what I mean? In this roundabout
Yeah, it's
way.
like, so he has him, the Hanover Fist, saying the truth, and you think that he's going to ultimately, you know, is it relativized? Is he gonna get the conviction? But no, it ends up like Jason said, like, no, actually Stern gets off because he opens up that trap door, right? So this one is a weird one because I guess the point here, and each of the different sequences has kind of different things that it focuses on that the Loc-Nar's involved in the worlds and in the universes, which I think we're supposed to understand is that corrupted power in our world is in all the areas of life, all the branches of government, religion, etc. Right? They're all corrupted because the one with John Candy, that was about religion and was sacrificing virgins and so forth. Which, by the way, the Loc-Nar can be accessed via human sacrifice. So it's not saying it's wrong. It's just there's all these different ways to access its power. This one is the legal system, right? And so we find out that military people, people in the system established at a certain level, are protected by the Loc-Nar, exactly as Jason was saying. So you can get away with it. And then we get into this war story about the World War II bomber B-17. And so now we're moving over into the domain of war. And then we have a sequence after that, or it's either one or two sequences after. Yes, the next sequence after that is about the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And corruption in terms of, you know, the establishment at that level. So it's almost like every area of life. And then eventually we get into the reincarnation story with the goddess and all that. But I don't mean to get too far ahead, but I didn't really notice a whole lot in the next one with the zombies and the World War II guy, except that the Loc-Nar basically explains that he's the source, or it's the source behind the world wars, like in all the wars, right? So whether it's the World Wars 1 and 2 or any of the wars in the galaxy, it is this negative entity force that's behind it. And then there's all these zombies that, you know, come out of the planes when that sequence ends, and then it transitions over into the Pentagon and the sex bots. This is where it gets really crazy. And not only that, I think there was they were probably trying to imply with the drug sequences in that the Pentagon was involved in, you know, drug running, because this is around the time that you've got McLeod's book coming out about politics of heroin. You've got Iran-Contra is either popping off or about to pop off. So, and what McLeod talks about is basically the same stuff that's in Iran-Contra. So it's beginning to come out, 1981, 82, that, oh, wait, the government, Western intelligence agencies have a key role in drug trafficking. And even though they stick in this idea of it being some kind of like sci-fi drug, I forget what it is, but it's basically saying the Pentagon is involved in the drug running. And then they throw in this sequence with Gloria, who's going to have robot sex. And it's John Candy that's the voice of that. I just thought this was all really weird, given the fact that I think we're right now on the verge. Like, here we are, 2023. I mean, the sex bots are basically now being rolled out. And I just did a podcast last night where I wish I'd kept it in here, but a lot of people don't know that Anton LaVey was actually studied under a guy named Dr. Nixon. And if you don't know, LaVey is the creator of the Church of Satan. in the late 60s. Well, he studied under this guy named Dr. Nixon, who was a pioneer in trying to build animatronics. And both Nixon and LaVey were fascinated by Disney's interest and focus on creating animatronic, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. When you go to Disney World, they already saw at that time. They were like, you know what, this is the future of sex. So Anton LaVey was actually saying in the 60s that all this animatronics would be geared towards the creation of sex bots. And so it's just funny because I was going through a list of movies that had sex bots like Blade Runner and all that. This is pre-Blade Runner. I forgot that there's this sequence in Heavy Metal about the sex bots.
Yeah, the sex bot thing, is really interesting because a lot of this, in my opinion, is coming at it from a very pro-woman perspective. Mm-hmm. Like everybody talks about now how the woman is the hero. Well, in this film, especially when we get into the next section, the whole thing is really about this young girl that ends up defeating evil. And you just mentioned the sex bot thing. And what's interesting about the sex bots is obviously in our culture, and rightfully so, it's more saturated that men would use these sex bots. But, even though it's done in sort of a manner where, the robot's trying to get with the hot chick, it's the woman that ends up actually being with the sex bot. So there's a lot of things in this film that even though at the time and even now people will say, it's a teenage kid's wet dream, it's extremely sexist. But on the flip side of that, it's extremely, feminist and pro-woman.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And, yeah, I mean, big time. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's get into the big story, the big crescendo, why the Loc-Nar, and when this is at the end where he kind of explains himself. And by the way, I also agree with you that the representation of World War II is just to kind of explain that, yeah, I'm involved in all these dark wars, and it's a good, I guess, turning point or segue into the next story where the Pentagon, it's more modernized, right? It goes from basically Earth is involved in both of those stories, and it seems to be our Earth in the future. And on top of that, what I think is interesting about the no, Dyer. Oh, good, he's back. Thank God.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to click out something and I hit the wrong button. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So aside from that, what I thought was really interesting, it's a classic zombie story, which at the time, kind of popular, Dawn of the Dead, or George Romero. I guess you could argue that. But what I like about it is nobody survives, right? I think that's kind of the point through the whole thing. There is no, actual apex character. It kind of follows the route of one soldier who survives the initial onslaught. Then he's murdered by the zombies. Then the only pilot that survives kind of goes through this thing, tries to survive. The Loc-Nar has attached itself to the plane. And, once he actually survives being downed on this island from the plane, you think he's going to make it. No, he doesn't make it. In fact, they zoom out to let you know that he's surrounded and about to be murdered by a slew of zombies. So I think that's just to show the Loc-Nar is kind of the apex of evil and the driving force of war.
It feeds on the mass human sacrifice. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. And so now we get to this point. And once again, there are a lot of occult overtones. Obviously, the stripping down of the woman, her going through the water before she comes, upon this monument, which is kind of a representation of the race. And obviously, this is a warrior race, but obviously a female warrior race. So she's not
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, she's not an anomaly. You know what I mean?
You made a very really profound point there when you're talking about how most people would look at this whole film and they would be like, "Oh, this is classic objectification of women by constant news sequences of boobs and butts, mainly big boobs." But the funny part is that no, actually, as the story progresses, like Jason said, this is a 100%. What I would call the dark feminine, the dark goddess archetype. And I'm doing a podcast in a few days, and I'm calling it the dark feminist goddess savior archetype. Why am I calling it that? Because this is a recurring theme that we're seeing in a lot of movies recently, not just with a feminine hero, not just with a heroine, but the notion of the goddess as the new kind of savior figure. and it ties into the replacement of what we call phallogocentrism, or religions that are male-centric or logocentric. And this is actually when you get into the history of like the New Age and the esoteric stuff of Blavatsky and all this kind of stuff. I was just talking about it today. I'll give you two examples. When Marilyn Ferguson wrote her Tavistock produced Aquarian Conspiracy, it's not a conspiracy text. It's actually a defense of the alteration of how things in the corporate world, in the social world, the legal world, everything needs to transition over to being feminine. In other words, Ferguson is arguing via her Tavistock handlers that the problems in the world are that men rule and men do things. And it needs, if we just switch over to a feminine goddess-based civilization, well, our problems would go away. We wouldn't have war anymore. Guess what? Psychonauts like Terrence McKenna in Food of the Gods, he says the exact same thing. He says that the mushroom told me that the religion of the future will be the worship of the goddess. And he says that because, again, it's the same plants. You go all the way back to Blavatsky in her Secret Doctrine. She's talking about the rise of the goddess. Alice Bailey talks about externalization of hierarchy. Isis Unveiled. They want to bring a goddess worship because that will tie into the Agenda 2030 of not hurting Mother Earth with too many people, depopulation. It ties into the emasculation of men, because you can't have a total control mechanism if men are empowered, if men are masculine and can stand up to this garbage. And so ironically, just the last summary point here, these last sequences, the last story of Tarna and the epilogue, they're basically about the future will be the destruction of the masculine green orb Loc-Nar with the Loc-Nar, with the reincarnated goddess figure, because we find out, as you said, that this girl that was originally at the beginning of the film that the orb comes to, she's told that she's the chosen one, and it turns out she's the reincarnation of this goddess girl, this goddess figure, this space goddess. She's the only thing that can defeat the war god, the death god, the Saturnalian male-centric, phallogocentric Loc-Nar.
Yeah, and again, a lot of I would say occult and pagan overtones, just the way that they summon this thing. And it's so funny because, basically the Loc-Nar lays out the destruction of her people. So you're basically talking about all of Earth, etc. And you have the Loc-Nar going into a volcano, erupting, and everybody that it encompasses basically becomes these green demon kind of beings. But then you see the scientific class, if you will, the rulers, and they're very, I would say, Roman looking. They look very Greek, but at the same time, they are they admit they're not a warrior race, right? No, we're not a warrior race where everything's in the science. They can't defend themselves. They have to go to this new warrior race, and they have to summon the warrior through telekinesis. You know what I mean? And this doesn't save their lives, but eventually it does save the planet's life. So again, all of these occult overtones throughout the entire picture. And at the end of the day, it's really, you could argue also that's self-sacrifice, because none of them make it, right? There's a couple of weasels in there that are like, what are we going to do? But at the same time, they all, at the end of the day, summon and get sacrificed in order for this being. And there's even kind of like this sadomasochistic torture scene of her before she kind of resurrects herself with her ally, the bird, her animal. You could even say it's her spirit animal, which, again, is united with at the very end of the picture, and to defeat evil. It's just like when you look at it, there's just so much going on in this movie beyond just the surface narratives, Jay.
Well, she's the female savior, like I'm saying, right? So, and remember, this is kind of parallel to Christ's self-sacrificial death, because when we think when she dives in with her sword, the sword is typically, the sword has a lot of symbols to it. I'm not trying to reduce it to only having one significance, but in symbology and literature and art, the sword often refers to the man. It's a masculine phallic symbol, right? So it's interesting that she has the sword, right? And then she offers herself, like she dives into the volcano. So it's a self-sacrificial death, and that's precisely where we get the resurrection motif of her being resurrected, as we find out the chosen girl at the beginning, who's the only one who can ultimately, fight against the I keep wanting to say the Sarlacc. I know that's from Star Wars, but the Loc-Nar, Loc-Nar, right?
The Loc-Nar.
Yeah.
So listen, let's take it into modern day, because obviously all this was triggered in my brain by this world coin thing, because it had slipped through the cracks on me. But when I saw this thing that literally looks like a steampunk crystal ball.
That's a great descriptor. Yeah.
A steampunk crystal ball that when you look into it, it takes your biometrics, then harnesses an app to verify that you're human. You have this non-human device interacting with a non-human network that's going to verify that you're human. Okay, and like the glee people were doing it with, and I was just like so blown away. And then to have it incorporated with Sam Altman, who's the new Bilderberg bro, the Builder bro, if you will. They just let him in right after he did his little speech with Eric Schmidt in front of Congress. It was literally that week. Now, he's the ChatGPT guy. He's behind this. They have this in New York City. It's under the World Trade Center. They have one in LA. It's all across the country. And to me, this is obviously a lot of things, right? It's a CBDC without being a CBDC. Yep. It's a UBI in a beta test. It is a cryptocurrency that incorporates the same type of biometric functions that they use in the UN World Food Program refugee camps, right? And you've seen, I think I've played that in front of you before, where they run a refugee camp, many refugee camps on the blockchain, and they scan your iris for that. So this is the same exact thing, only people are not only acquiescing to it, they're participating voluntarily. And then you have the holders of the orb, the great holders of the orb, Jay. So every time someone scans in, the holders of the orb get a little more crypto, but then the more that they check in or utilize WorldCoin, in other words, the people that actually scan in to get their one WorldCoin a month, you have to check into the app every month to get your one UBI WorldCoin. That's why people are supposedly doing it. But then the more times that they interact with it or end up trading it, etc., then the holders of the orb gain more of this cryptocurrency as well.
Before we go into that, I got a question for you, and it's because so remember when Trump went and met with the Saudis and they all put their hand on that glowing orb? What the heck was that? I never figured out what that was.
That was I'm pretty sure that was a UN event. Let's bring it up, because I'm pretty sure that they were looking for some kind of pact. Let's see, Trump, creepy globe, picture should be the first thing that comes up.
Pretty sure he's with the Saudis when he did that.
What's that? Oh yeah, of course he was. So let's see. That Vox, the hilarious Trump orb photo is nearly a perfect metaphor for his foreign policy. So I think that this was right around the time they cut that big arms deal, right? Remember? Here it is right here. So
Saudis,
yeah, it's 2017. So yeah, they had just cut that big arms deal, and they had their hands on this globe orb, so you could kind of see the Earth underneath. Just the world happens to be an ocean.
Yeah.
So well, yeah. I mean, the funny thing is they actually calling this WorldCoin thing the Orb, and they have a mission statement in which this is a world ID, for proof of personals, and it's a world app. And if we go right to the first one, for every human, you know what I mean? This is what they want: the world ID, transactions, milestones. It's a community building a human economic system. This is the Internet of Bodies. Yeah.
It's weird because I remember, we all kind of heard, even if you were skeptical of Bitcoin when it first popped on the scene in 2012 or 13 or whatever, the narrative right away was explicitly libertarian, that the purpose of cryptocurrency, in the sense of just Bitcoin and its blockchain, was decentralization and anonymity, privacy, security, and not being basically bullied by the state, having your money, your transactional capabilities shut off. So that was the whole purpose of this invention, as far as we know, right? And then, of course, soon after that, we find out a lot of cryptocurrencies immediately pop up, and most of those begin more and more to be kind of shifted over into the model of globalism. And one of the first that I remember hearing about some years ago, maybe 2018, was when I think it was VeChain. When VeChain came out, and I think at one point it was up there in the top 20. It's fallen. I was looking now; it's fallen to 40. But VeChain's whole premise was we're going to be the blockchain for tracking and tracing of all objects in terms of shipping lanes and logistics across the globe. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why do we need a cryptocurrency to track and trace everybody's objects and exchanges across the globe? The whole purpose of this was to have privacy, security, right? Sovereignty. And so now crypto eventually evolves into being essentially just ways in which World Economic Forum, Davos, and these other figures, is why you have Klaus in 2019 or 20, they put out their list of the cryptocurrencies that they thought were most amenable to the New World Order. And they had things like Ripple and Solana were on there, among others. And then now it's shifted over into, why don't we just make a straight up total nightmare New World Order coin, which is basically just going to harvest all of your information, biometrics, and data, tie everything to that. I think, too, some of the people are right who've been saying that the reason that the internet is being flooded with AI, deepfakes, bots, all this nonsense, and I think it's been really ramped up, especially since 2016, 17, because what that will allow is the future push for, because of so much fraud, we're going to have ways for you to have private keys and private ways to access the internet so that we know it's you. The narrative is going to shift into, we don't know who we're interacting with because the AI is so sophisticated, it can now fake anything. So you could be thinking that you're talking to the Bermas when you're talking to the Bermas bot, which is basically just like Bermas, right? Because it's been studying him and mastering him for many, many years. So we're going to have this intentional crisis of identity on the internet. What's the solution? The globalist solution, which is identifying yourself via biometrics and private keys, which means total loss of privacy and sovereignty across the internet. So WorldCoin is just absolutely one of these attempts. I hope it fails. Some of these attempts have already failed. Things like Filecoin, things like Internet Computing Protocol, other cryptocurrencies basically tied to the New World Order directly. So I think that I know ICP is. I'm not sure about. I forget about Filecoin exactly, but there've been tons of these that were basically just New World Order coin that they're trying to sell as like, oh yeah, I mean you might lose all of your sovereignty and you might lose all of your identity. We'll control all that, but it'll be really quick transactions. Like, but if I can't transact because I'm a bigot, like then it doesn't do me any good. It's a scam, and a lot of this shit's scams. Like the crypto world is rife with scams. I mean, I follow the whole architecture of FTX and all that really closely. It was amazing the degree of scammery that was.
Well, you look at that now, and the judge just said he's going to jail, which is pretty interesting. That just happened today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that revoked bail. I don't know exactly what to make of that, other than the fact that obviously it was a laundering scam.
Yeah.
For the power elite. And a lot of these things are based in non-reality. They are Ponzi scams. And, obviously that's going to happen. I see probably right around the time that we're in the major part of the election cycle in 2024, there'll be another crypto pump and dump, another hype and drive.
Oh, yeah.
And
we got the Bitcoin halving coming up in 8 months, 9 months, and that always drives another market upturn.
I mean, when we see that, though, I think that you're going to see a lot crumble at the end of the day. I think there's going to be a lot of unfair government regulations. Yeah. By then, we're probably going to be in a world where Trump's been convicted of something. I know there's a lot of hopiates out there, but they don't understand what's going on. Those people, I'm Jay, not to shift gears too hard, but I'm hearing all these people thinking that, all the precedents are now being set, that once Trump's the president, he's going to really be able to go after the deep state and prosecute the Clintons and the Bidens of the world and all these things. They're not even giving him discovery in the case of the election, just like I told people they wouldn't. in his fake insurrection cases, they're not really going to give him discovery. They're not going to allow him to talk about the election and the anomalies or show any evidence. What were people thinking? So if we're living in a world where the guy who was elected president in 2020 after being a wildly popular president is in jail, and he can't run for the presidency. He can't even get the primary vote. And they install a Biden or any other puppet. We might be 4 years away from a WorldCoin type thing being the biometric security in our election. And that'll still be fraudulent because it doesn't matter what kind of biosecurity of where you voted. You don't get to see the proprietary software that counts the votes. It's a scam. It's a bait and switch. Oh, this is going to make sure that we have total integrity. We know exactly who's voting. We're going to have every count right there. And then at the end of the day, you're not going to see how the sausage is made. They're just going to install anybody. You won't be able to question it because, like you said, the AI will have picked up, what the truth is. And they're the authoritative source. We're really moving in this direction and rapidly, And that's what's funny to me because, out of everything we see in something like a heavy metal or a futuristic universe, that's almost never picked up upon. Like, again, the cyberpunk type animatronics, there's a lot of transhumanist stuff in there. But the narrative being set by AI, I would say really the only thing I've seen more recently that picked up on a lot of that was Westworld. Westworld really showed how that was a driver. You could go back and say, obviously, Orwell and Huxley, had it partially right with the drugging of the populace and the 2 + 2 = 4 and the screens that could see you, et cetera, et cetera. But none really picked up on massive AI-based censorship and I guess reality rollout, if you will. Are we going to be able to combat that?
Well, here's the thing. So I just did a deep dive into Mockingbird. I'm enjoying this book right now. It's called Mighty Wurlitzer. It's a pretty well-known book about the history of Operation Mockingbird by Hugh Wilford. And the reason that's relevant is that that's the legacy media's version of what they're doing now, post-Trump, post-Russiagate, collusion, P-gate, and all that nonsense, and the hacking of the DNC by Russia. All that's fake. The bots that were supposedly buying the little 1-inch boomer ads of Jesus and Trump together on the 1-inch little Facebook. Supposedly Trump won the election by flooding all these boomer ads to Facebook. Nobody who's competent believes that. But those were all the excuses that were utilized at that time by the establishment, which all came out, by the way, in the integrity leaks in 2019. And the establishment at that time was saying that we can't survive a 2-term Trump election. And that was why they had to roll out the coup, in my view, in part to distract and destroy the Trump election, and also to bring about the voter fraud through ballots. That was on the basis of coup. And the censorship online is still being done on the basis of Russiagate, even though all that's been debunked and it's all fake. So that was the basis for the Twitter files, the collusion between the intelligence agencies, the Biden administration, Obama's Stay Behind group, which is the Knowledge Initiative or whatever it's called, where he was doing censoring with the Biden administration, going after Trump in D.C. even after Obama supposedly out of office. All of that's run by British intelligence, CIA, and the Obama Stay Behind groups, and that's who's really running the Biden administration. So they were saying that they were worried about a second Trump administration. In my view, not even so much because they're that concerned about Trump himself, but just because he's such a bull in the china shop that he just says whatever, and it causes this floodgate of people questioning the news media. The one thing that Trump did accomplish was to call out fake news for 4 years straight, and that really damaged the credibility of mainstream media, which is pretty much still in the tanks. So I think that even though Trump made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of things really wrong, the establishment was they were concerned enough about the possibility of his sort of brazenness that he might cause more problems. And so the Integrity Initiative leaks from the Institute of Strategic Studies out of the UK, the British intelligence group, they were themselves saying that we've got to do whatever is necessary to stop Trump. So if that applied to the last election, you absolutely can bet, as you're saying, Bermas, it's going to apply to the next election, which means they'll do potentially anything to make sure that Trump isn't in there. Again, just because of what he represents and just because of what he might say, because he's a bull in the china shop. So that would require then, like you said, crazy events, perhaps. I mean, false flag events, meaning then that something crazy happens. Oh, all the MAGA terrorists. And actually, the Biden administration, as you know, has been already prepping for the crazy MAGA people.
Yeah.
And that they're all white supremacist terrorists. They put out that document saying that all Trump supporters are potentially terrorists. So they're really priming the pump, as you know, for some kind of loose change, fabled enemies style event to make everybody be a bad guy. Timothy McVeigh style, OKC, that kind of stuff. That's very likely. However, as you said, how can we fight against all this stuff? Well, the good news is that a lot of people, I mean, we're kind of at a tipping point. A lot of people are like, they're not going to immediately believe this stuff. Immediately, people are going to start picking it apart. And so I don't know that those kinds of narratives that worked in, OKC or 2001, I don't know they're going to work that well. I think a lot of people are going to be skeptical. Trump is wildly popular, and he represents that groundswell reaction against the mainstream, even if it's got a lot of problems, even if it's still kind of, there's a lot of boomer holdover stuff that's kind of goofy. But I think the hope is that the numbers and the tide is seeming to turn. And I wouldn't place all my hope in Trump, but I'm just saying that if we can keep doing what we've been doing for the next 3 or 4 years, I think that tipping point of people that are actually red pilled and awake is going to explode exponentially.
Well, to me, I just think right from the very beginning of 2020, I said if he tries to run again in 2024, they're going to put him in jail. I truly, I've never been a walls are closing in guy. I'm not that guy. I'm more looking at this as they're bombarding him with different charges and seeing what will stick. They're trying to rig the system in every single way. And like you said, it's not that he was so much different, but the fact that he really took away any real credibility from the system, constantly pointing out it was lying. And some of his policies were good. They're much better than where we're at today. I'm not going to begrudge the man that. Obviously of RFK Jr. on the left, waking a lot of people up as well.
Yeah.
They don't even want debates. I guess my biggest fear is that, like you said, maybe a 9/11 is not enough. Maybe an OKC type thing isn't enough. But we're almost in World War III right now. It's not even really a proxy war at this point. We've seen some unprecedented things via the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And if there were a nuclear device or event to go off anywhere in the world, that could be the type of event that could cause an election to be subverted much in the same way it was during COVID 1984 for numerous reasons. So, I'm keeping that. Oh, and to implement some kind of a digital currency.
Yeah,
if in
I thought
fact,
about that too.
Yeah. If in fact at the same time it would cause economic instability, and finally the house of cards falls in, and enough people have the magic device that they say we're just going digital and screw it.
Yeah.
I hope there are holdouts. I hope there are people fighting back. Mr. Dyer, this was a really fun episode. No one else is going to talk to me about heavy metal for an hour. Tell people where they can find your stuff. Obviously, jaysanalysis.com is the spot, but you're moving, shaking. You just did the 4th hour of Jones today. You're on the Rockfin. Tell us about it.
Yeah, you can find all my stuff there at that one central location, my website. You can also find everything I do on Rockfin as well as another great outlet. Some unique content over on Rockfin as well. You can find me on YouTube under Jay Dyer. You can find me on Twitter. Getting a lot of traction out of Twitter nowadays too. So you can find me on Instagram as well, and now on TikTok. I'm not a huge fan of TikTok, but you can find me there as a backup. But yeah, I think you and I have had some great conversation in the past on films as well. We did Holy Mountain. I was just looking at that show the other night that you and I did on Holy Mountain, and remembering that was actually a really good discussion we had. A lot of predictive stuff in Holy Mountain, the sex bots, coffin apartments, austerity, mind control, all that stuff is in Holy Mountain as well. And so, you and I should do more film reviews, because I think, you get it. You're able to tie the predictive programming in the films and the narratives, the old stories into today's news headlines very well. And not many people can do that. So it's really cool to do these podcasts with you.
Well, thank you, bro. Like, I'm a big fan of Rob Ager and Collative Learning. He does a lot of really great work. I'm a big fan of The Meaning of the Monolith. But I've always liked films. And, there's always been some kind of different level there. And you know what? The thing about movies to me is, Jay, is, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of popcorn bullshit out there. Sometimes it's mixed with some good stuff. I just watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but...
Not yet, no.
It's all about directed evolution, and it's really the story of Rocket Raccoon and how he came into being. And it's also got a very big motif on world creation, and the High Evolutionary is the main bad guy.
Well, I did see Sound of Freedom, and I know there's a lot of controversy over that, but the film itself, as a film, I thought it was great.
I thought it was great too. Saw that as well. I saw that in the theater. I just recently watched Guardians of the Galaxy. There's a lot of popcorn bubblegum bullshit in that movie, sure. A lot of cheap laughs, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, still slip some stuff in there. And, I think that those things are important. A lot of the Marvel movies have. A lot of them directly talked about, New World. We should do a thing on that, like the good things that Marvel has slipped into their movies over the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, Captain America Winter Soldier, if you remember, that was about the AI figuring out who the future potential patriots are and taking them out ahead of time.
Yeah. They've done some pretty interesting stuff. But, with movies in particular, I can watch a movie and maybe not even like it, right? But it just eats at me. A lot of the Kubrick stuff is that way the first time around. I watch something, I'm just like, man, this makes me feel uneasy. Why is that? And then I watch it a second time, and you kind of go into it, and it's like, okay, now I get it, because there are all these overtones, undertones, hidden meanings, things that you're missing in the background. And it's a powerful medium, just like any other medium. That's why I gravitated towards it with documentary films. We do need to do more of these because I do love them. Mr. Dyer, I am going to the Red Pill Expo tomorrow. I'm sure that you're up for an American Liberty Award. Are you going to Texas tomorrow?
I wish we could. I would have already committed to being on a panel at a comic book convention this weekend, so I have to go do that. Actually, with the guy I was telling you about, who's my buddy, who's the comic book artist. I thought I had maybe his books around here, but he invited me to do a co-convention with him. So I'm going to be in a panel tomorrow in Kentucky. I don't know when this is coming out, but if you're in the Tennessee, Kentucky area, you can find that convention on my website, on my links. But yeah, otherwise I would be there. I am up for, I think, best analysis program. So they have a whole bunch of categories. So are you on that?
I did get nominated for award, but again, the Red Pill Expo is right here in Iowa. It's about 2 hours away, 2.5 hours away over in Des Moines.
Griffin thing?
Yeah, and you know what? Yeah. Let's be honest, man. This is probably going to be the last chance I get to see G. Edward Griffin in person, and it was really kind of a no-brainer for me, especially because it's close, and I've always really loved what he does. So I'm going to try to get some interviews there, keep grinding, working. I know you're grinding and working, like you said. You're on a thing. Keep it up, brother. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ditto.